Hi everyone, welcome back to another video. This time I'm going to be doing a list and it's going to be the 10 albums that I think will always stay with me. I'm hoping this will become a thread of some kind because I'd love to see your responses not only in the comments but in other videos if you make videos at all. And if not, give it a try. I'd love to see what you guys say. I need to make it clear this is a very different list from my top 10 favourite albums of all time, which is a video I tend to do in the future as well. The difference being that those albums are not just ones that I love but also I find impressive and warrant repeat listens. These albums, they may not be my favourite albums even by the bands that I'm discussing, but they're the albums that have the most sentimental value to me and the albums that I can always return to no matter what mood I'm in, how I've been doing, where I am in my life. They always bring me an immense amount of joy. But before I get started, I want to say thank you to all of you out there. A couple of days ago I released a video in which I explained where I've been, how I've been doing and just what my plans are and so forth. The outpouring of kindness and support that came from you guys was something that I didn't even realise I needed. Truth be told, I didn't have very high expectations for the video. I was sort of iffy about uploading it in the first place and I decided, take a gamble, and if 100 people see it, that's cool, and if I don't get any comments, then it's something off my chest at least. But to come back to dozens of comments, all being incredibly supportive, people saying they're looking forward to what I'm doing with this channel, telling me to do what I want, people taking an interest in my mental health, people sharing their stories. I think it was a super helpful exercise for everyone, and it really humanized you guys to me. And that might sound a touch dramatic, but once you've been doing YouTube for a while, you end up getting to a state where it's just, oh, how many views has that got? How many likes has this got? And to just hear your stories, it really did a great deal for me, and it made me have such an even greater appreciation for you guys. And I hope it did the same thing for you in regards to me, because I know I never talk about that stuff, but to get that stuff off my chest really did a lot to help me clear my head and get my head straight. So I want to continue doing more personal videos, even when it's about music or films or whatever, or any other interest I have. I want to maintain a personal relationship, and I thought what better way to do that than to talk about the 10 albums that have the most sentimental value to me. Without further ado, let's get started. The first album I want to talk about is an album by perhaps the first band that I'd ever say I truly fell in love with, and that's Black Sabbath with Sabotage. Now, I could have picked a number of Black Sabbath albums here. I came very close to picking Paranoid because that was the first one I heard after my dad introduced it to me. I nearly picked Master of Reality simply because that's my favourite. I realised that Sabotage is probably the Black Sabbath album which has the most sentimental value to me personally. And that might sound a little weird because it's often the overlooked one. People tend to say the first five-year-old masterpiece and Sabotage is a little iffy. I simply do not subscribe to that belief. I think it's possibly their second best album, second only to Master of Reality. Not only is it the most experimental, the most interesting, the most diverse album they've ever done, it's got some of their absolute best songs on it. The Writ is still my favourite Black Sabbath song. Symptom of the Universe just has an absolutely almighty riff. Megalomania, no one ever talks about it. That song is unbelievable. Hole in the Sky, thrill of it all, front to back, absolutely marvellous. But really the sentimental value for me comes from the fact that it taught me that not everything's going to be brought to you on a silver platter, and sometimes you have to look for things yourself. Because if you were to pick up any book on rock music, most of them would just say, listen to Paranoid, listen to the debut, listen to Vol 4, that sort of thing. Very rarely would you have a book or a website or anything that recommends Sabotage. That is an unbelievable crime within music journalism, because this album is truly misunderstood. This is an album that really, I don't think, ever gets the love it deserves. And for me, again, it told me never judge a book by its cover, always seek things out, and you might find something that you truly love. And it's a rhetoric that I've maintained to this day. Up next, we have an album by not necessarily the first band that I fell in love with, but I can safely say this is the first band that I ever got truly obsessed with. Judas Priest with Painkiller. Now, like with Black Sabbath, this isn't my favourite Judas Priest album. I would certainly have Defenders of the Faith over it. It's probably their second best above Screaming for Vengeance, British Steel and Sin After Sin. I mean, that's another video entirely. Painkiller is one of the most unapologetically metal albums one can hear. It's not hokey or stupid or taking the piss out of metal or anything. It's viewing it with such reverence. I bought this album just on a whim because I like the album cover and I like the title. It was just another level from British Steel. It was louder, it was prouder, and to me it's still one of the most overwhelming metal albums in history. And it really told me a lot about being unapologetic, sticking to your guns, not bowing down to pressure, because in 1990 this wasn't the coolest style of music to be playing. And Judas Priest could have played up the alternative rock thing, but they just went hell for leather and released Painkiller. And again, that's something that I've taken a great deal of influence from in my life. Always do what you want to do. don't bow to public pressure, and the rewards will be yours. I have a huge number of great memories with this album. I always put it on when I'm at the gym. One Shot at Glory in particular, it just fills my heart. I can't explain it. It's true heavy metal magic, and the album I'd recommend to people who don't really know much about heavy metal. This is a perfect example because it's unapologetic, it doesn't bow, but it's also just great. So yeah, Judas Painkiller, I don't think I'll ever grow tired of it. Up next, we have an album in a completely different direction, Weezer with Pinkerton. For a long time, this was my absolute favourite album. This was the album that showed me that you could be a rock star and still have that sensitive side. Pinkerton was just such an introverted, inward-looking album, and it's had a huge influence on my songwriting. I think Rivers Cuomo is possibly the best pop songwriter of the last 25 years. I think he's produced some of the catchiest songs in living memory, and Pinkerton is his crowning achievement in my opinion. Not only are the songs absurdly catchy and just joyful, they're also really bittersweet. Show me that, you know, you could be a chart-topping rock star and also confess some really uncomfortable truths about yourself. If you listen to this album, he's talking about reading people's diaries, falling in love with a lesbian. Across the Sea is still a slightly uncomfortable listen with the things he's saying. But it's all just incredibly honest. And to me, that's something I always admire, and Pinkerton is just an absolutely perfect example of it. That is genuinely an album that I don't think I will ever grow tired of in the slightest. And at number 4, we have my favourite album by one of my absolute favourite bands of all time, Deftones with White Pony. The main reason I have it on here is because I would say it is possibly the most rewarding first listening experience I ever had to any album ever. I was at the shops and I saw that they had White Pony and everyone was telling me how great it was, and I was reading in magazines about how absurdly brilliant the album was. I think it was around 10 years after it came out, so maybe it was just off the run of Diamond Eyes being released. It was like $4.99 new, and I thought, I don't buy many CDs. That's changed, as you can probably see behind me. I thought, you know what, I'm going to just go for it, I'm going to take a gamble. And I went home and I put the album on, and the whole time I was just mesmerised. Chino's so good, the production is stellar, and I just thought this is one of the best albums I've ever heard in my life. And then when it got to the end of the album and I listened to Pink Maggot, which I don't even think is on the US version, I could be wrong on that, it might just be the UK version that's on, which is a song that never gets played live, no one ever talks about it. I have such a strong memory of sitting on my bed by my CD player and just nearly breaking down because I was like, this has been such an overwhelming journey. You have songs like Elite, which just make you want to smash windows up, and then you have songs like Digital Bath, which are just emotional powerhouses. I immediately put the album on again, and I must have done that about 8 times that day. It's still an album that I recommend to people and say, go and listen to White Pony. You have to listen to White Pony, no matter what style of music I listen to. I've recommended it to indie kids, punk kids, hip hop people. I've just been like, just check that album out. And most of them come back saying it's a masterpiece. So yeah, Deftones' White Pony, absolutely deserving of a place on the list. And up next, Andrew Jackson Jihad with Knife Man. Now this might seem like a strange choice, but this is an album that really taught me a big lesson about music, and something that I've maintained to this day in almost everything I produce. And that is that you don't have to be one thing. It showed me that you could not only just be really sad, you could be angry, you could be funny, you could do all those things, and they could mesh together brilliantly. I mean, a perfect example of that is on the song Sad Songs. And the song is hilarious. I remember the first time I heard it, I was genuinely laughing out loud, but it's also inherently sad and depressing. There's a lot of anger in Sean Bonnet's delivery. I could have picked a number of Andrew Jackson Jihad albums here, but Knife Man is my personal favourite, and it is the album that introduced me to the band, so it only makes sense to have this one. Wildly funny, deeply sardonic, sarcastic album. And an album that whoever I show it to, even if they go, oh, he's got a bad voice, oh, it's very sporadic in its instrumentation and stuff like that, everyone I show this album to at least appreciates the humour of it and the craft. It's a fairly long album for this style of music. It's about 40 minutes and over a dozen songs, but it just flows marvellously. Every song is a treat. Can't say enough good things about Knife Man, and I hope to talk about it more in the future. But for now, it's an album that I can't see myself without. I've just realised how long I've been talking, so I'm going to try and speed it up for the last few albums. Up next, it's Neutral Milk Hotel Within the Aeroplane Over the Sea. This is considered like, a generic hipster album that only hipsters go for, and I'm not really making my case with wearing the plaid for this video. I should have thought that through. Doesn't take away from this album. This is actually a case for an album which is so overly talked about, people get sick of it, that people then shut up about it, and then when you return to it, you realise, no, people should talk about this album. It is a genuinely mind-blowing piece of work. The songwriting and the storytelling is so vivid, it's so emotive. I think that Jeff Magnum is genuinely a genius. This album is such a curious case because on Avery Island, the album they released before, it's perfectly good. It's a solid lo-fi singer-songwriter rock album. If they only released that, people would never speak about them ever. In the Airplane Over the Sea, what a swan song. What an incredible step up. It's just one of the best albums anyone can hear. And I don't think that's just a case of people being into hipster music or whatever. I just think the songwriting is just so irresistible. The musicianship is just divine. It has such a all-encompassing atmosphere to it. The stories of Anne Frank, I can't say a bad word about this album, and the flow is just marvellous. The way it goes back into Two-Headed Boy at the end, every time it's jaw-dropping. Yeah, Neutral Milk Hotel in the Aeroplane Over the Sea. Up next, Arcade Fire with Neon Bible. Spoiler alert for my favourite albums of all time list. This is my favourite album of all time, and it has been for a number of years now. I first got it when I was on holiday in Croatia, I believe, and I went to a music shop and they had a bunch of CDs, but it was all just Croatian rap artists and that sort of thing. And I went to go see if there's anything that I recognised, and the only name that I recognised was Arcade Fire. They were selling it for about £3 new, so I thought, well, what's the worst that could happen? I'll take it home. And it didn't click with me at first. I took quite a few listens, and eventually I sort of gave up on it. I actually heard this album before many of these albums, but this is when it really clicked with me. And I listened to it once again, and I thought, oh, and then it all made sense. And now it's one of those albums where the moment I start hearing Black Mirror, I have to listen to it all the way through, right to the last moments of My Body is a Cage. It's faultless. Every song is an absolute masterpiece. No Cars Go is, in my opinion, one of the finest musical achievements of the 21st century, beyond the shadow of a doubt. Not just the composition, but the instrumentation, everything just comes together perfectly. I love the songwriting, and it's a bizarre case with Arcade Fire because I really don't like everything now. I think the two albums on either side of Neon Bible, Funeral and The Suburbs are both good but not spectacular. Reflector, bit of a mixed bag. Generally I have positive feelings towards it, but I can't say wholeheartedly that I think it's a great album. It just is the best album, and this is the album that I think will always stay with me above any of the others, which seems like a strange place to say it now because I've got a few left to say, but I can't help it, man. This album just does everything for me. Up next, we have an album by Heights, and that album is Dead Ends. If you're not aware of Heights, they are a UK hardcore band who are active, I believe, from around 2010 to 2015, I believe is when they broke up. It could have been later than that. They were, in my opinion, the shining light of British hardcore during this time, and this was a scene that was super important to me. In fact, I've actually started working on a video in which I give a whole retrospective on that scene, talk about the best bands, talk about the worst bands, where they are now, that sort of thing. It's going to be a big video, so you may have to wait for that one, but Heights are they're the band that really cemented my love for it. There were other great bands going, but I remember reading a review in Kerrang of this album, and it got 5Ks, and I'd been reading Kerrang for a number of years at that point, and it was the first time that I ever saw a full 5 out of 5 score. Well, I've got to check this out, and I went online and I heard it, and it utterly bowled me over. I was sort of aware of this style of music before. I'd heard of Converge, I knew of Neurosis, I knew of ISIS, but this album just, not only did it show me how good it could be, it also showed me that it can come from anywhere, because this is just a small UK hardcore band. To me, it always felt like, oh, they're all from America, they're from LA, they're from New York, there's nowhere local to me. This is just a little group of mates from Hertfordshire, and they released an absolute masterpiece. The follow-up album, Old Lives for Young Lives, was pretty piss weak in my opinion. I think that was when the original vocalist left and the bass player took over that position, and it just wasn't nearly as good. But this album is, in my opinion, the quintessential UK hardcore album for that time. Above anything Gallows did, above anything Rollo Tomassi did, or Brotherhood of the Lake, or Feed the Rhino, or any of those bands, this band were just head and shoulders above them all. And it really showed me that great music can come from anywhere, and not just that, but that anyone is capable of it. Because again, just a group of mates from Hertfordshire couldn't be more ordinary, and yet here we are. You don't have to be Vince Neil to make a big rock album. You don't have to be James Hetfield to be a commanding vocalist. You can just put your everything into something. You'll reap the rewards. So yeah, Heights, Dead Ends, a truly special album, and one that not enough people have heard, and one more and more people need to check out. Absolutely. And up next, I couldn't do this video without mentioning my favourite band, the Mountain Goats. Now I could have picked a number of albums for this position, but I had to talk about The Sunset Tree, which is my favourite album by the band. This album it showed me that, again, someone who seems so ordinary can be capable of musical greatness. It all comes from within and what you can do. You can put lots of flashy stuff on an album, but you can never outshine raw talent. And that's what John Darnielle has. And every time I listen to this album, there's a couple points where I actually well up, and I'm not a super emotional person when it comes to musical films, but if I'm driving along and Hast Thou Considered the Tetrapod comes on with that almighty final set of lyrics, it just fills me from head to toe, and I can't explain the magic of this album. The whole album relates to a domestic abuse story or something from John's childhood about his stepfather, and it's not something I can relate to in the slightest. But then you hear his stories about how much he loves his music, or breaking free and wanting to be liberated from yourself. And that's a universal thing, or at least I think it is. It certainly affects me. And every time I listen to this album, it makes me feel less alone in that. And it's an album, again, that whenever I return to it, I sort of forget just how brilliant it is. It's a really uplifting album, while also being horribly depressing at times. Definitely an album I would recommend to anyone, and if anyone has that feeling of wanting to break out or feeling trapped or whatever, or suffers from that, I highly recommend you listen to the Sunset Tree, because not only does it make that feeling a lot easier, it makes you feel less alone, and that goes a hell of a long way. And for my final album, this is obviously the hardest position to pick, because I was having to have something more recent, but also something that has stayed with me, and there are a few contenders for this position, but then once I remembered this album, I just thought, there's no competition. It's Touche Amore with Stage 4. Again, similar to the Sunset Tree, it's a story that I can't really relate to. It's the story of Jeremy Bomb, the vocalist, his mother dying of cancer, and no one in my family has ever died of cancer. I consider myself very lucky in that regard. It's a hardcore album, and hardcore is probably my favourite style of music throughout my whole life. But it's a hardcore album with genuine emotional depth and genuine intelligence. And Jeremy also expresses himself marvellously with his philosophical, introverted lyricism, and in my opinion, there isn't another album that comes close to this album, perhaps in the last 5 years. I genuinely think it's an absolute masterpiece. Stage 4 is just something else altogether, and the lesson it taught me here is that you don't have to be soft or namby-pamby or weeping on an acoustic guitar to express yourself in that way, and for it to be honest and not be melodramatic. Just put everything out there and maybe people will listen. And I'll tell you what, for Touche Amore, I am listening, and I plan to listen to this album until they put me in the ground, to be honest. It's just a genuine bona fide masterpiece in my opinion, and no doubt one of my favourite albums of all time, and an album that to the end of my days I'll be listening to. So that brings us to the end of the video. I hope it wasn't too much of a downer for you. I realised I didn't mention too many happy albums. For something like this, the albums that stay with me, it's always the ones that have more of a primal emotional connection. So yeah, put your answers in the comment section below. I realised it's a very long video. If you want to do a video response, that's absolutely fantastic. I'd love to see all of those. So yeah, thank you very much. Link in the description below to my Facebook page as well as my Instagram if you want to follow me there. You guys are the best. Thank you for watching. See you guys in another video.